Hello and welcome to E3D's Unreal VFX Material Transitions DVD. What we're going to be going over today is creating one material which is actually combined of assets that could be used for two separate materials. We're going to be combining those into one and transitioning between the two. We're also going to build off of that using similar techniques and then create a nice dissolve effect. Now, with special effects, as many of you know, require assets from many other departments, many other people. It's not just up to the effects artists, and such is the case with this DVD as well. For example, the environment you see here is using assets all recycled from the Materials DVD, which some of you might have already seen, created by Ricky Babington. And the character here was created by Adam Schumann and was rigged by JP Self, which was animated also by Ricky Babington. We'll also be triggering the transition and dissolve effects through Kismet and Matinee. Let me give you an example of what the end result will be. You can see our character there starts out as a stone statue. He then transitions into his real-life textured counterpart. And he animates there. You'll see him go into his idle pose, and then he dissolves away. And not only is that dissolve a pretty cool effect, but it also acts as a great way to get rid of enemies on screen. You can have them dissolve, and then through programming and scripting have them completely deleted from system memory. Another cool example that we'll be using before we get to the animated character, we'll be using a skull which was modeled by Enrique Pina III. And these are actually triggered through Cascade, where the others were triggered through, of course, Kismet and Matinee. You can see the skull on the left dissolves, and the skull on the right transitions. And these are just a couple of the building blocks we'll be using to get to the final result. Okay, before we start to make all of those materials, we've got to start with some of the basics. And the first thing we're going to make is an opacity mask material. We're going to just go over a few of the basics, then we're going to string them all together so we can create what you saw in the intro. With that, let's get started. First, let's go ahead and go to File, New, and you can name this package whatever you want. We're going to go ahead and call this E3D _ effects material. And we're going to call the group materials because the first thing we're going to create is a new material. And we're going to name this one M _ opacity mask. Now the M _, that's just my own personal preference for naming, my own naming convention. It kind of depends on your game engine, what you guys are doing. I'll typically do M for material, T for texture, and P for particles. The other thing you want to do is in the factory, you want to make sure that it is set to material. And go ahead and click OK. And this will create a new package for us with a blank material in it. We're going to have to scroll down and find it. Here it is, E3D effects material. First thing, you want to right click and save. You can see a little asterisk on there. That means it was a dirty file, meaning that it's been modified. So we're going to go ahead and save this package. So now that package is saved and there's a blank material in there. And you can see that its group is materials. So let's go ahead and double click the material here. Actually, before we do that, let me go over a couple options that your Unreal might look a little bit different. For one is this is how all the icons are viewed in this viewport. You can set their size, basically different preview windows, percentage of them. I typically will do 64 by 64, and that way they'll all kind of be the same size, and you can, once we get more materials in here, you'll be able to see them all relatively nicely. Go ahead and double click on this. And let me get this into the capture window for you guys. So here we have a blank material, and it's kind of tough to see, but there's a black cube in the preview window. So here would be the preview window of the material. Once you string a material together, this is going to give you a preview of what it looks like. Let's go ahead and up here, click on sphere. We're going to use a sphere for this example for now. Right now it's black because nothing is hooked up. This is where you're going to hook everything up to. You're going to plug things into the diffuse, emissive, specular. We won't be using specular power today. We won't be using opacity. We'll be using opacity mask. We will not be using distortion or any of the transmissions, and we will be using normal for some things. This first one is going to be an opacity mask, like I said. So first you want to click on this gray area. This is basically the end result. You want to click on this. Now, there's no border or anything. It shows that it's selected, but just go ahead and click it, and its properties are going to be down here. First thing we want to do is set its blend mode to masked. And now what that's going to do is enable us to plug in different values to the opacity mask. A little nub here, and based on the value we give it here, either the pixels will draw at 100% opacity or they won't draw at all. They'll completely be masked out. So first let me change the opacity mask clip value to 0.5, and I'll explain what that does here in a second after we create some more nodes in here. First thing we want to do is create a constant. And to do that, there's a couple ways you can do that. You can right click and go up to constant and then click on that, and it'll add a new constant in here. But because that right click menu is bigger than this capture screen, we're going to be using this menu over here on the right. And if this isn't available to you, if your screen looks like this and there's nothing over here, you want to go up to Window and make sure this one is checked. And that brings it back in. And you can also resize this if you want. But we're going to add a constant. To do that, you want to left click, hold down left click, and drag it into the window. And now we have a constant. And the constant is just going to be a single value, basically a number. Right now it's 0, which represents black. It has 0 color information. And we're going to change this value to 1. And if you click on this, its properties and information are going to be down here. These are its properties. These are the properties of the entire material. These are the properties of each individual node. And also, or I'm referencing these, I'm calling these nodes. Some people will call these widgets. I believe that's the correct Unreal term. So if you hear people say widgets, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about anything you pull in here, any constant, anything you add into the material editor viewport. So let's plug this into the diffuse. And now you can see that our material ball got entirely white. It's just a value of 1. It goes into the diffuse, which shows up as pure white. And now another thing, if you're not seeing this being white, and if you're not seeing the preview updating in the viewport, make sure these are all selected up here. You'll want to click the eye. You can basically these preview these will show in real time the preview window over here updating, and also the material nodes and widgets over here updating. Once we have a bunch of material nodes kind of interacting with each other and affecting each other, you'll want to see them kind of update in real time, and it'll give you a better preview of what's happening. So, and to move a node around like this, I'm just holding down Control and left clicking, and holding down left click and moving it around. And that's how you kind of create a node there, or kind of move around a node. Let's go ahead and add another constant. Now we can either drag it in from the side like we did before, or we can select this one and press Control C, and then Control V, and it'll copy and paste that same type of node right next to it. And let's give this one a value of 0 for now. And we're going to plug this into the opacity mask. And if you see over here, you'll see that it's completely gone. Actually, it's not gone, but it's just in wireframe mode it'll be there, but it's not drawing. It's completely clipping out because the value of 0 is going into the mask. Now this, let me click on the base material node here. This opacity mask clip value is saying once a value plugged into the opacity mask is beneath this, then do not draw those pixels. So if this value is lower than 0.5, it is not going to draw any pixels. So even if it's 0.4, 0.49, it's not going to draw, not until you get above that value, 0.51. So now it's going to draw. And you can see it kind of working there. let me show you I'll show you also what is happening with a textures to give you a better idea of what's going on. But before I do that, make sure you click on this green checkbox up here. This will update your material and propagate it to anything in the game that's using it. And it's very important to click this. You want to make a habit of clicking this little green checkbox. And once we click that, we're going to want to save our package. As you can see, our package has been modified with that little asterisk. So you want to select the package and right-click and just do save. And it's going to save automatically where we saved it originally when we made it. So now what we want to do is I'm going to import a texture. And this texture that I have created is, let's see, it's called if-else base. We'll see it in a second. We want it to go into the same package, and for the group, make sure you call it textures, and just go ahead and leave you can leave the name the same. I'll do T underscore for my, that's a habit actually. And another thing we want to check, compression no alpha. This texture does not have an alpha channel on it, so we don't need one. Actually, none of the textures we'll be using today will have an alpha channel, so we want to make sure and check that. Go ahead and click OK. You can see our texture has been imported. Go ahead and save the package again. I want to get in the habit of saving the package. Let's go ahead and double click on this texture, and it's going to open it up, give you a better preview of what's going on. Now this texture is a pretty simple, kind of like a checkerboard texture that I made in Photoshop. And these values are all grayscale. This would be, I mean, absolutely no color, completely black. This would be pure white, 50% gray. I guess you'd call this 25% gray and 75% gray. In Unreal terms, these would be like a value of 0, a value of 1, a value of 0.5, like for the constants, and 0.25 and 0.75. So with that selected, let's go back to our material editor, and we want to add in a texture sample. Now you can either right-click, but that goes off the capture screen, so I'm going to drag over here on the right and drag in a texture sample. And that, because we have the texture selected in the generic browser, it brings it in right here. If you didn't have the texture selected or somehow clicked off of it, and this is black, this is blank, what you can do is go back to the generic browser, make sure it's selected just by clicking on it, click back to the material editor window, click on the texture sample node, and click this little green arrow here on the right. That will place it in here. Art, of course, didn't change because it's the same texture. But just in case yours wasn't working, that's what you're going to want to do. So now for this one, we're going to plug this texture into the opacity mask. Now, we don't want to plug this top value in to the opacity mask because this represents RG and B, the full RGB values. We just need values from 0 to 1, so we can use either the red, green, or blue channel. So we're going to take the red channel, plug it into opacity mask. And I'm going to click on the cube button up here so you can kind of see it a little bit better. Now you can kind of see what's going on here. Basically, with our opacity mask, any value in this texture that's below 0.5, which is going to be the darker ones, is not going to draw. It's going to completely mask out. You can kind of see it, see what's going on there. And that's the opacity mask is determined by the grayscale values of 0 to 1. Going to the opacity mask, and then clipping out or masking out those values. Now if we change this value, say to 0.25, go 0.2, it's going to draw some more of the squares because the opacity mask is lower, so the values would have to be below 0.2 for them to mask out completely. And there you have it. And go ahead and click the green checkbox. And one more thing I want to go over before I exit out of here is the two-sided checkbox. If you check that, you can see that the cube becomes two-sided, obviously. So now you can see the back faces. For what we're doing today, though, that dissolve and that transition material I showed you earlier, those are one-sided, and I do that because two-sided makes things more expensive on system processing power, and it also can cause kind of some rendering errors depending on how complex your material is. Like if you were using the Fresnel shader, which was that X-ray preview I showed you earlier. So it'll be good to try out in your examples, but today we're just going to stay with one-sided. But don't hesitate to experiment with using two-sided materials. Okay, this next material we're going to create, we're going to call it an if material. So let's go ahead and select the materials in your package. And in the gray window over here, right-click and do New Material. Let's go ahead and name this m_ifs. And the factory is already set to material because we created it within that within the material group. Go ahead and click OK. Let me resize this here so you can see it in the capture window. And the first thing we're going to do is set the basic material again to masked. This is going to be another masked material. And set the opacity mask clip value to 0.5. And let's bring in an if node or an if widget. So you can just go ahead and select that and drag it over. And I also need to bring over about 3 or 4 constants. So let's go ahead and drag in one. And I'm just going to Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste this. Control-C, Control-V, Control-C, Control-V. We're going to have 4 of these guys. Okay, let me describe to you what an if does. An if basically takes a value into A and a value into B, and then it compares the two. It's if A is greater than B, show what's in here. If A is equal to B, show what's going into here. If A is less than B, show what's going into here. Let me show you what that means. So let's go ahead and give this constant a value of 1. And this one will keep it at 0. This one will keep it at 1. Let me just move these down a little bit. And by the way, I'm just clicking, holding Control, clicking another one, and then I can hold down Control and left click and move them around. Oh, there's that 5th one. I can go ahead and delete him. So let's plug in this one into A and this one into B. And we'll plug this guy into A is greater than B. We'll plug this one into A is less than B. And for equals, we'll go ahead and just plug this one in as well. And you can see it shows up as pure white because this is A, this is B, and A is greater than B. 1 is greater than 0, so show this. So, which is going to be white. And if A was less than B, it's going to show black. So if we made this one, say 1, and this one's 0, it's going to be black. Go ahead and change these back real quick. You can also do decimals, so even if this was, 0.4, and this one was 0.5, it's still going to show up as white. But this one's greater than that one, so show this. So go ahead and set these back. And I'm going to import that same checkerboard texture again. So go ahead and click over into your generic browser. Go to Textures. Select the texture. And let's grab a new texture sample. Go ahead and plug this in. And again, for this, we only want to use either the RG or B values. So let's use the R value and plug it into B. Now A is greater than B in all cases, so it's going to show up white. But if we give it a value of, say, 0.5, you can see that it's going to show some of them as masked out. So let's plug this into the opacity mask. Let's copy this constant real quick. Control V, C, Control V, and plug this into the diffuse. And there you have you can kind of see what's going on. You can also, if you kind of want to save your amount of nodes, you can also just because this is a value of 1, you can plug that into the diffuse. But typically, you're not going to want to do that because this will eventually could eventually be more complex than just a simple value. But there's a quick way to do things. You can plug one node into several others. You don't need to create a new one for each time you do something. So yes, you can see if we change this value to, say, let's say 0.2, you can see that what's being masked out and what's not. And don't forget to click on the green checkbox and save your package. And that is pretty much how to make, that's how to use the if node along with the opacity mask. And that is kind of one of the building blocks for us doing the transition and dissolve material that we'll be working on. Okay, we're going to create a third material. This is going to be a linear interpolate material, or it's going to use the linear interpolate node. So let's go ahead and right-click, select materials, right-click over here, and do a new material. And we're going to call this M_linear interpolate. And its factory is material. Go ahead and click OK. You drag this up so you guys can see the capture. And the most important thing about this is the, let's see, the linear interpolate. We want to grab, it's right here. Go ahead and drag that in. And some people will refer to this as a lerp, as you can see right there. It says lerp. So if anyone says lerp, this is what they're referring to, as a linear interpolate. For the type of material, you can actually leave it at opaque and Phong. For this example, it doesn't need to be masked, as you will see in a second. So let's first thing, let's create a constant 3 vector. Go ahead and drag that over. And the constant 3 vector is going to basically be your RGB values, so you can give it any color you want. Let's just make this one blue. And let's copy and paste this, Control C, Control V. And let's make this one red. So just a value of 1 for red. And then we're going to create a single constant, so grab, say, constant in here. And this is the basic setup for what we'll be doing. Before we hook things up, let me describe to you what's happening. What a lerp does is it basically, you'll plug in something into A and something into B, and it blends between the two based off of the value going into the alpha. Now alpha could be confusing because it's not necessarily looking for an alpha channel. As a matter of fact, the textures we'll all be using today, none of them have alpha channels. It's actually looking for a value between 0 and 1, a single value. So like a grayscale value, basically. So let me show you how this works here. So let's plug blue into A and red into B. And we'll plug the constant, which has a value of 0, into alpha. Now you can see nothing happens because it's only 0 would be blending, let's say 0%. There's no blending basically, so it's blue. Now if you give this a value of 1, it's going to become pure red. And if you give it a value of 0.5, it's going to be purple. It's mixing the two together evenly. Let's go ahead and plug this into the diffuse right there, so you can kind of get a better preview here in the viewport. So let me import that checkerboard texture once again, so you can see what that does to this. Go ahead and go to Textures, select it. Let's create a texture sample. And here you have our checkerboard, which again is a bunch of grayscale values, 0 to 1. So take the red channel, because we only need one of these. We don't want the RGB, as it's only looking for a single value, into the alpha. And you can see kind of what's happening here. Wherever there's a value of 0, it's pure blue. Value of 1, it's pure red. And anything in between, it's going to blend between those two values based on this value. This is pretty powerful node in the material editor in Unreal. He'll use lerps quite often. It's a great way to fade from one to another. I mean, people will use this for fading from a daytime skybox to a nighttime skybox. They'll use it to make puddles on the ground, on the asphalt. It's a good tool to have. It's a great way of blending two materials, two textures together. And we're going to use that in combination with the if node on an opacity mask, or on a masked material, like we had done before, to create the dissolve and the transition materials that I showed you earlier. So go ahead and click the green checkbox, and let's save the package. And I'm going to move on to one more step. We're going to use kind of all these last three material examples to create the basic building blocks of the transition next. Okay, this next material builds on what we've already made. It's going to be kind of the building blocks for the transition material that we'll be working on, and that you saw in the intro. So let's go ahead and create a new material again. And we're going to call this M_ transition single layer. Factory set to material. Go ahead and click OK. And drag this up in the capture window for you. And this one is also going to be a masked material. So set the blend mode to masked, and set the clip value to 0.5. Okay, and first thing, let's create a constant 3 vector. We're just going to give it some color so we can see what's happening easier. So plug that into the diffuse. Strictly all that is there for. And now let's import a texture. There's a gradient. There's a couple gradient examples that we can import. Let's go to textures, right click, import. And we want gradient sample and gradient dissolve. Let's go ahead and rename these T_, and make sure compression no alpha is checked. Hit OK. And again T_, compression no alpha, and hit OK. Now let me go ahead and let's save the package. It's a good habit to get into, to save the package. And textures, let's go ahead and open up the gradient sample. This is just a basic gradient, nothing fancy. I made it in Photoshop. It goes from white to black. And it's, as you can see here, they're both 512 by 512. And this one is essentially the same thing. It also has an overall gradient of white to black. I created a pattern with dots. You can kind of see where all the dots were. And then I just plugged in some filters, some distortion filters, and I think I used a liquify filter to kind of make this all smeared looking. And then I created a gradient over the top of it from white to black, and just kind of multiplied it. So you can kind of see how overall it goes from white to black. That's pretty important for these textures. You definitely want them to go from white to black. You want to have a good gradient. You want to have good values in between the white and the black. And that'll make sense kind of more so as we go along. So let's, first thing, let's get started. Let's import both of those texture samples. Now we're only going to use one at a time, but I'm going to show you both in here, show you what they both do. Let's import the regular gradient sample. First, we're going to create an if. We're also going to create a scalar parameter. Now, this scalar parameter could also be a constant, but later on we're going to be using it to control this material through Kismet and through Matinee. And the scalar parameter, the difference between this and a constant is that you give this scalar parameter a name. So this particular one isn't going to, this name isn't going to matter for this example, but it is important for the next ones coming up, so it's a good habit to get into. So when you plug in a scalar parameter, you definitely want to give it a name. Well, let's call this one dissolve. And let's go ahead and plug this into A. And let's give it a value of 0.5. And now we're going to plug in the basic gradient, the red channel, into B, into our if. And then we're going to we need to create two more constants. Let's create a constant. Let's copy and paste it, Control C, Control V. And let's give this top one here a value of 1. And we're going to plug this into if A is greater than B, and if A is equal to B. If A is less than B, return a value of 0. And we want to plug this into the opacity mask. And you can see here in the node and in the window that you can see what's masked out and what's not. That is done, of course, by this if, which has a value of 0.5. So it compares pixel by pixel. If this pixel is greater than this pixel, say if A is greater than B, return value of 1. So these gray values down here are greater than these values, so they're returning a value of 1. So when you go up here, these values are less than these values, so it's returning a value of 0. So you can kind of see what's going on there. Now if you change this, say give it a value of 1, it's completely there, value of 0, and it's completely masked out. So you can kind of see what's going on as you change the values. And by the way, to enter the value, just type in the number and then you can press enter, or you can click off of it, but it's easier to just click enter. And you can see how it kind of goes up, masks out less and less each time. So go ahead and click the green check mark. We're not done yet, but let me go ahead and save this package. We're not done, but it's a good habit to be in to do that. Clicking the checkbox and saving the package. So instead of the basic gradient, let's plug in this little more interesting gradient to B. And you can see how it kind of dissolves the brighter values first to the darker values. So let's give this a value of 0.5 just so you can see what's happening. Yeah, there you go. A little more interesting. And now for preview purposes, we want to see this moving. We want to see this dissolving. We don't want to sit here and manually type in values. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a sine curve. And to do that, you just find sine and then time, sine of time. So you're going to plug time into sine. And what this does is, well, you can see it goes from black to white to black to white. I'll plug that into A. And you'll kind of get it, you'll kind of see what's happening. It's moving pretty quick there. So let's slow it down. Let's change the period to, let's say, 5. And that's in the sine curve, in the sine node. Click on that in its period. So now this is okay for a preview, but a sine curve by default goes from -1 to 1, and we're going to do some math here so we can get a better preview so it doesn't go below 0. And to do that, let's first create a multiply node. So let me move all 4 of these up a little bit. Let's take a multiply, and we'll plug the sine into the multiply. and we want to multiply it by 0.5. So let's create a constant. Give that constant a value of 0.5, and I'll show you with an image I have here what exactly this is doing. So now it's multiplied by 0.5, and then we want to add it by 0.5. So let's create an add node or widget. So we plug this into here, and the 0.5 into the other add, into B of the add. And now we plug this into A of the if. And you can kind of see it. It's now going much more smoothly from 1 to 0 and 0 to 1 in transition. So let's save this and I'll show you kind of what's happening here. Okay, and what's happening here to the sine curve is at first it goes from -1 to 1 to -1 to 1. And now in material editor, anything below 0 is going to return black. So we just kind of want to go from white to black to white to black to white to black. So let me kind of bring up the material editor into view here. And bring our picture up as well. So you can see we have our sine curve, and it's multiplied by 0.5. So what that does is shrinks the curve in half. So it goes from -0.5 to 0.5. Basically compresses it. And then we add 0.5 to it. Right here is the adding a value of 0.5. And that shifts it up in the y-axis. So then it goes from 0 to 1 to 0 to 1. And it's just a cleaner way of getting a better preview whenever you use the sine curve. So one last thing. I'm going to leave that there because later on in the following materials, we're going to use both of these. We're going to be using a setup like this for previewing, and we'll be using a scalar parameter to actually control it in game when we're ready. A couple things I want to do is just a little bit cleaner. So let's select all of these, control click each one of these. You can either control and click each one individually, or you can hold down control and alt if you're using a PC, and left click and drag, and that'll select them all as well. And then press C. That'll bring up a comment screen. So you can do, I'm going to type in sine curve / preview only. Okay, so now you can kind of control all of these just by clicking on this, on the name, and then control click and drag around. And yeah, this is pretty much the basic building blocks for a lot of the stuff we'll be doing for the rest of the materials, which is coming up next. Okay, for this next example, we're going to build off of the transition single layer, but instead of a sphere, we're going to show you something a little more interesting. We're going to use a skull head that Enrique Pina III has so nicely modeled for us. And we're going to make, instead of a sphere, we're going to make that skull dissolve. So let's, we're going to build off of this by duplicating it, and then we're going to import the mesh of the skull, and then we're actually going to make a couple versions of that. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's right click on this material and do, first you want to select it and then right click and do duplicate. And we're going to call this one M_transition skull layer. And go ahead and click OK. And here we have it. It's the same thing for now. What we want to do now at this point is we need to import a mesh. So select your package and do import. And we want to do skull face ASE. Hit open. And we're going to type in the meshes for the group. And for name, just do skull face. And let's do, we'll do underscore smesh. That stands for static mesh. It's kind of a common, that's what they're imported as, whatever your guys' naming convention is for your game or your project. Feel free to name it whatever you want. Well, that's just what we'll be doing. And click OK. And now we have, you can see, a meshes model. And that, you can see it's like a skull right here. And now you want to expand the LOD info, expand these values and elements. And for material, we want to grab this new material. We're making M transition skull layer. So go ahead and click on the little green arrow, and you can see I'm kind of dissolving there. So now let's apply the proper textures, and it should look pretty cool. So let's go to Textures and Import, right-click and Import, and we want Diffuse, Normal, and Spec for skull face. Skull face, Diffuse, Normal, and Spec. Go ahead and click Open, and let's stick to our naming convention. T underscore compression no alpha. Check that. Okay, T underscore skull face normal, and set compression normal. Don't forget to for the normal maps you want the compression settings TC normal map, and then click OK. And for this one, T underscore skull face specular. Make sure set this back to default. And compression no alpha is checked. Click OK. Okay, so now that our textures are imported, let's save our package first and foremost, and let's open up our skull layer material. And one thing, instead of just previewing this sphere or a cube, let's actually preview the skull so we can kind of get an idea of what's going on. So back in the generic browser, go to Meshes, on Skull Face Mesh, and then click on this little arrow here in the material editor. And that'll bring in the skull. You can tell its default size is pretty small, so you'll have to zoom in. And you can kind of see it, see the head kind of dissolving away. But now instead of the blue color for diffuse, we're going to plug in his real textures, so it looks really interesting. So let's go to our textures, and we will start with the skull face diffuse. Start with the skull face diffuse and add in a texture sample. Place that here, and place the black nub into the diffuse. That's RGB. You want all the RGB values to go into the diffuse. And you can start to see it's already looking pretty interesting. Let's go ahead and delete that constant 3 there. We're not going to need that anymore. And let's see, copy and paste this twice. Control-C, Control-V, and then Control-C, Control-V one more time. This is going to be our spec, and this is going to be our normal. So let's find our spec and plug it into here. So for spec, skull face specular, and click on the little arrow here, and you can see the specular in there. And drag the specular, the black little nub into the specular of the skull. You can see it's got a little speck going on. For normal, same thing. Import the normal or into the texture sample here, and plug that into normal. So now you can see it looks pretty cool, kind of dissolving away. This is kind of the very basics of the dissolve transition we'll be doing. This is kind of like one layer, so it's one layer dissolving away. And for this example, I know I said for you guys to keep in a scalar parameter, so we'll be using that in Kismet and Matinee, and we will. But for this skull and another one I'm going to show you before we get to Kismet and Matinee is I'm going to show you how to call this in Cascade, and you can place these into the world as emitters, as particles. So go ahead and leave that there for now. It's a good reminder for later. We want to use, let's see here, we want to use what is called a mesh vertex color node. So let's find that right here. Here it is, mesh emit vertex color. And this is going to allow us to talk to the to whichever channel we want through Cascade. In Cascade, you can talk to the RGB channels over time. We'll show you how to do that. Right now, just take the blue channel and plug it into A of the if. This is going to control our speed once we hook it up in Cascade. Right now it's not doing anything, but when we bring it into Cascade, it's going to control how quickly or how slowly it kind of dissolves away. So click that green checkbox, and one thing we can try with this one, I mentioned that it's pretty expensive to do two-sided materials, but for this example, it'll probably be okay. So we'll go ahead and check two-sided, and to kind of see what that looks like in the viewport, just take this sine curve, plug it into the if again, and you can see that it looks. You can see kind of the inside of his skull there, which looks pretty cool. Before we finish, let's plug in the mesh emit vertex color back into the if. And click the green checkbox again and save the package. Okay, and now before we go into Cascade with that, we're going to create a new mesh. We're going to duplicate this mesh, and we're going to call this skullface underscore cask, C-A-S-C, smesh. Actually, let's skullface underscore cask 1 smesh, because we're going to make 2. So go ahead and click OK. So that material, that mesh, we're going to be using this one in Cascade. Go ahead and save this for now. We're going to create an additional skull with a different material on it, similar to what we've been doing. We're going to set that up for Cascade as well, and then we're going to place them side by side in a level so you can kind of see the differences. Okay, this next one we're going to build off of what we just made, setting it up for Cascade as well. But this time, instead of being a mass material, we're going to add some translucency here. So, and with that, there are advantages and disadvantages. So let's select our old material, right-click, duplicate, and we'll call it M transition skull layer for now. Go ahead and save the package. And let's open up our new material. And the first thing we want to do is set the blend mode to translucent. And that is going to allow us to have all transparency on it. And because we're going to have it kind of transition into a Fresnel shader. First thing we want to do with that is uncheck two-sided. Now you can see there are some rendering errors. Some of the back faces drawing through the front. It's best to have a simplified mesh for this, like a sphere or maybe a lower res head with not so many polys in the ears. But this example is still relevant and it will still work. But just something to keep in mind if you're making this for an actual game. First thing with being translucent is it doesn't accept light, so which means the normal maps aren't going to work. So you can go ahead and delete that. Another thing we're also going to delete is the specular, and we're going to take the diffuse layer and we're gonna transition this into a Fresnel shader. Let me show you what we're going to transition it into. First, we want to let's expand this viewport a little bit. Things are going to get pretty busy pretty quickly, so we're going to have to be zooming out a lot, and it's going to be a bit of a mess. But let's go ahead and move this sine curve back. Let's move these back. This up here, that is the mesh emit vertex color. Yeah, this is the scalar. And let's start by creating a Fresnel. So you want to grab the Fresnel and add it. And what a Fresnel is going to do is make it kind of look like an X-ray. You can kind of see there what the Fresnel does. We're going to transition from this into this using the similar techniques we've been using for the dissolve already. So let's take that from now and let's get it a little more interesting. Let's add some color to it. So let's create a multiply. And let's multiply it with a constant 3 vector. And the values we put in here are whatever colors you want it to be, basically. I'm going to do some values brighter than white so it glows. I'm sorry, 0.64 for red. For green, let's go 3.2. And for blue, let's go with 6. And we're going to plug that into the multiply. Multiply it with the Fresnel. Plug the Fresnel into the diffuse. And you can kind of see what we've got. Something looks pretty cool right there. And this here, the Fresnel, the exponent value will determine its kind of fall off a little bit there. You can see the higher values, the more opaque it is on the edges. The lower values, more opaque it is in the middle. So let's go ahead and give this a value of 0.1 for now. That will make more sense later as to why we're going with it so thick. But that's what we're going to be transitioning into. So let's move these away, and let's start to set up the transition from one to another. So we have our ifs here, or our original setup. First thing I want to do is create an add. What I want to do is kind of brighten this whole texture. And go ahead and delete this one. Let's copy and paste this constant. Let's give this a value of 0.125. So we're not going to add too much to it. But what this is going to brighten the entire texture. Because this texture is driving kind of the speed at which things dissolve or transition. Again, this is one of those things that's going to make more sense as we hook it up. But let's go ahead and plug that into our if. And now, of course, you're not seeing anything because nothing's hooked up yet. This is going to take several steps before we can get any visual feedback. Now, one thing we want to do with adding this value to this texture, it's going to cause some values to be brighter than white, brighter than 1. And we don't want that. We don't want our base texture to glow. We just kind of want it to be its own values clamped at 1. So we want to add in a clamp or a constant clamp. Either way, let's go ahead and add in a clamp and plug this add into the top little widget, top little nub there. And since we already have constants with values of 0 and 1, we can use these. That would be the max, 1 would be the max, 0 would be the min. And let's plug this into B in the if. And now this is going to be our top layer. This is going to drive the actual skull face texture. So let's Control Alt and drag. And let's just select them all, hit C, and let's name this top layer. All right, almost getting something to show here. Let's go ahead and what we want to do with this is we're going to actually duplicate this. We're going to make kind of a second layer, if you will. So let's move these. Let's move our sine curve preview and move these guys. And as you can see, things are going to start to get a little out of control. Okay, so let's go ahead and manually control click each one of these. And then hit Control C and Control V. Now drag these up. This is going to act as our second layer. We're going to add like a glowing edge for our second layer, and then which will help reveal the Fresnel. So let's go ahead and press C for comment. Let's call this mid layer edge. Okay. So now we have two ifs, and these are going to be driven by, actually for better previewing purposes, let's preview these by the sine curve that we have. This will help us see what's going on. So now you can see they're essentially doing the same thing. Actually, they are doing the exact same thing. What we're going to do is swap out this add here. Right, let's go ahead and delete it. And we are going to bring in a multiply. Actually, okay, so we're going to bring in this multiply, and we don't need this. We don't need to have two of the same textures. So we can just drag this one up into here. And we can take this constant, give it a value of, let's say, 0.825 for now. I'll describe to you what this is doing. Let's go ahead and delete that texture node. Okay, what this is doing, as you can see that the, I'm sorry, let's make sure to plug in the multiply into the clamp. And now you can see these two ifs are acting very similarly. One is kind of going a little bit later than the other. That is controlled by this here. That's this constant. Let's describe this as edge width. Go ahead and call it edge width. And how this is happening is it's taking the same material or same texture and it's multiplying it by a value less than 1. So it's darkening it. So everything that's happening to it is happening the same, but because it's receiving its values later, because it's getting brighter a little bit later, then it's going to appear as if it's transitioning a little bit later. So if you want, let's say if we gave it a value of 0.95, you'll see that it would be a little bit closer. Let's say a value of 1 will be exactly the same. And just to get extreme, let's say a value of 0.2, you can see that it's really far behind. So let's stick with 0.95. And next what we're going to do is we're going to subtract these from each other. We're going to give ourselves a nice glowy edge by doing this. So let's bring in a subtraction node. So subtract this. And you want to subtract this if from this if. And you're going to see it's kind of leaving us with just the edge values. Let me plug that into emissive just so you can see what's going on. Let's plug in the diffuse texture so we can see a little bit better. Yeah, you can see we're kind of isolating the edge that way. And with this, I don't want it to be white, so let's add some color to it. Let's create a multiply, or we can just select this one and copy it. Control C, Control V. And a constant 3 vector. Control C, Control V. Now we're going to change these values here. Let's give these values of, I want this to glow quite a bit. So let's say 40, 20, and 10. Plug that into the multiply. And plug this into emissive. And you can see we're getting a nice glowy orange edge there. And before we go any further, let's make sure to apply those changes and save our package. We need to do this again often as these materials get a little more involved. So let's move things around a little bit. And move these back. Move these back a little bit. Okay, now we're going to work on the actual transition of this to this, of the diffuse to the Fresnel. And to do that, we're going to use the linear interpolate node, which we went over previously very basically, but now is where we're going to apply it. Let's take our base texture, and we're going to add a linear interpolate. Let's plug this base texture into B. And we will bring our Fresnel shader into A. And we will plug that into diffuse. And of course, we're getting an error because nothing is going into the alpha yet. We want to control this transition based off of this if. So you can kind of see it starting to work there. But there's a few more elements we need to add. So one thing is we're going to create another linear interpolate. We're actually going to plug this one, disconnect this linear interpolate, plug this one into here, into A, plug this one into B, and again that alpha is going to be controlled by this if, and we're going to swap this one to be controlled by the bottom, by the top layer if, by this guy here. And this will all make sense in a second. The reason for that is we're going to bring in another constant 3 vector. So Control-C, Control-V. And let's give this values of, let's say, 0.75, 0.38, and 0.012. This will give us a nice orange color. And what this does, this allows us to control kind of the color of the actual edge itself. We saw it kind of glowing earlier, so it's kind of tough to see. But once we go back to opacity masked materials where we can accept light, then this is going to actually come into effect. Let's go ahead and hook this last linear interpolate up to the fuse. And you can see we're almost there. The last thing we need to do is, because this is translucent, we can give it opacity. So what we want to do is create another Fresnel and drag that into here. Let's show you what this does. If we plug this into opacity, you can see it's kind of starting to work, but not quite. It's applying the Fresnel shader to the entire material. We don't want to do that. We want the Fresnel to only appear not when the skull itself is showing, but when the X-ray kind of look is going on. And one thing we don't need, because this is translucent, is the opacity mask. We can disconnect that. So we'll take the Fresnel that we have here, and we're going to add it. We're going to bring in another add node. And this Fresnel is going to be added to the values of this if. And then this add, we're going to plug it into a constant clamp. And the reason we're doing that is because we're adding Fresnel values to other values, and some are going to get brighter than 1. We don't want them to be brighter than 1. And plug this into the opacity. And now you can see it starts out solid and opaque and transitions into a nice Fresnel kind of X-ray looking material. And before we finish, we want to set this up for cascade. So bring in the mesh emit vertex color that we have, and we're going to plug this into our ifs. The blue channel into this if, into A, and the blue channel into this A value. And now it's ready to be set up in Cascade. Now if you're using different meshes or different textures and it's not dissolving quite as smoothly as you'd like or transitioning, the values you want to change are going to be this here. This brightens the whole thing. Overall, the gradient of your texture is what kind of drives everything. So if you need to make something brighter or darker, you can do that in the material editor here by adding values or multiplying values. But this here is ready for Cascade. So let's go ahead and apply those changes and save our package. Okay, next we're going to create another mesh and set up for Cascade. Now we're going to take the last one we created for Cascade in our package and our meshes, and we're just going to duplicate this, and we'll just call it skullface underscore cask2 mesh. And let's go ahead and open this up and open our materials. And we want to select M underscore transition skull layer for now. We want to plug this into the material section. So you can see it's a little bit different there because this one, like we said, doesn't have the doesn't accept lighting, and it doesn't have anything normal maps or spec, which is kind of common for a lot of particle effects. But which this of course allows us to get the transition to the kind of the X-ray transparent look. So that is all we need to do, and save our package, and we are ready to create particles out of these in Cascade. Okay, for this one we're going to take the materials and those skull faces that we made, and we're going to bring them into Cascade, Unreal's particle editor, and we're going to trigger them to dissolve in Cascade. So let's first select our package, we'll file new, for group name put particles, and for the name I'm going to do P_skullface1, and make sure for the factory you set it to particle system. Go ahead and click OK. You can see that here's our new particle system right here. And this is Unreal's Cascade, their particle editor. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Just more or less kind of going to show us how to hook up the specific case for our transition material. We've got your viewport here. This is where your modules go. This is where you're going to add emitters. You have your curve editor down here, and all your modules settings in here. See across the bar you can restart the simulation in here in the viewport, restart it in the actual level. Take a thumbnail image, which if you take a thumbnail image, it's what will show up in the generic browser. I'll toggle wireframe mode. If you have meshes, it'll go into wireframe. If you have sprites, they'll show a little wireframe kind of around the sprite. This is bounds, turn on and off. We'll show the bounding boxes of the particle systems. This will toggle on your post processes. This will toggle on and off the grid, play, pause, and this will give you can set things to play back at different speeds. So if you want to see a particle system play in slow motion, you just select one of these. This here will, I believe, make the entire system loop, and it loops by default. And this one here in real time, I believe is new, and I have yet to use it. This will change the color of your background. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So in this gray empty area here, we want to right click and do new particle system. And you can see this bunch of default sprites start to kick out. And the first thing we want to do, we're not going to want a bunch of particles to appear. We just want one to appear of the skull. So let's select this main module up here, the name of it. Just go ahead and left click on it. And then down here you want to expand the required module tab. And you'll want to scroll down, and for emitter duration, we're going to set this to, let's say, 10 seconds. And this means that the emitter is going to last for 10 seconds. Right here, everything's looping, so you're not going to notice much of a difference yet. We want to leave the emitter loops to 0. And that means if we set it to 1, it would play in the level once, and then it would stop and never play again. But we want it to play for its lifetime and then play over and over again. You can see here, after it was emitting for 10 seconds, and then it stopped, and it started again. That's a little visual you can kind of see in here, but we do want to set this to 0. And right now, its spawn rate is 20. That's 20 per second. So right now it's spitting out 20 particles per second. We want to set this to 0 for the spawn rate. We don't want a rate. What we want is a burst list, and this is going to allow us to spit out just one particle. So instead of a per second value, this will be X amount of particles whenever we want. So click on the little green plus symbol here, and for count, we're going to press 1. And you can see it spits out one particle. And because the emitter duration is 10 seconds, it's not going to spit out another one for another 10 seconds. And you'll see in a second here that it just went up there. And for its lifetime, we want to set this to 10 seconds as well. So for distribution, click on this little blue tab, and we're going to set this to float constant. And we're going to do that because we don't need a min and a max value. We just need one simple value. So let's go ahead and set that to 10. And we want to right-click in this area here and do in the blank area between the name and the, say, the lifetime. We want to right-click here and do type data, new mesh data. And click on that to select it. And here in the mesh, we're going to plug in one of our skull face meshes. Go to the meshes and find the skull face cask 1 mesh. Go ahead and plug this in. And now you notice nothing shows up yet. The reason being is it doesn't have any color value, and it's going to need some color value for you to see it. So right click in this dark gray area. You can see it might not be easy to see on the capture. This is dark gray. This is almost black. Go ahead and right click down here and do you want to do color and then color over life. And you can see that it's starting to move up and it's starting to dissolve as well. Now it has velocity on it. We don't need any velocity. It has min and max values, but we don't need any whatsoever. So we can just delete it by pressing the delete key, or you can right click and do delete module. Now you can see that it's spawning and it's lasting for 10 seconds and it's dissolving. But how is it dissolving? Now when we brought in the color over life module, if you click on this little tab here, that will bring up its curve editor. And you can see the graphs here. So let's click on this. This will fit vertically and fit horizontally. And what this is doing, by default, it goes from a value of 1 to 0. So if you remember in our material for this, let me go back to that real quick. Our material for the skull, we placed in the mesh emit vertex color. So it's talking to the blue channel in Cascade. And that's what's controlling the dissolve, because by default, the blue channel is going from 1 to 0. And if you click on these little colors here, the red channel and the green channel will not show up. And now the alpha channel will not show up. So just the blue channel goes from 1 to 0. So you can see that right when it starts to dissolve as that value is 1, and then it goes to 0 over time. So we're gonna do is move these in just a little bit, make some modifications. So if you right click on it, and let's say set time, let's set this to 0.2. And let's right click on this one and set time, set this to 0.8. And now this, you'll notice that this bottom graph time is from 0 to 1 and not 0 to 10 seconds. And that's because this is color over life. It serves as a multiplier. So this is like 0% and say 100% of its lifetime. It's not 0 seconds to 1 second. It's more like 0% to 100% of its lifetime. And I want the dissolve to be a little bit smoother. So let's click on the first keyframe, or the first key there, control point, and just click curve auto. And do the same for this bottom one. And so it'll ease in and ease out. And that's pretty much how you control it in Cascade. We're going to save this, and we're going to do the same treatment to the transition to the Fresnel shader, and then we're going to place these in a level. So make sure to save the package. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing, but to a new particle system. We're going to plug in that the skull with the Fresnel shader on him. Let's go ahead and right click and do duplicate. Let's just name the skull face 2. And double click to open this up. And for mesh data, we just need to plug in the other mesh, the skull face cask 2 mesh. This is the one with the different material on it. And then you'll see that it's disappeared. We just need to reset the simulation and make sure to save the package. You've seen that it's disappeared, and to get it back, this is just a bug. You'll want to close Cascade, and then you'll want to reopen that particle system. And you can see that it's kind of dissolving. Now, the thing to notice here is that there's not that nice glowy edge that we created, and that's just, I think it's either a bug or something with the complexity of the shader in a Cascade. It's not showing up in Cascade, but it will show up in the level. Even if you show bloom, it's not going to show up, but don't worry because it will show up in the level. So with that, let's start placing these in the level. Okay, now we're going to place those two particle systems in the world in a level just so we can see what they would look like in game. So let's go ahead and select particles there so we can see them in our generic browser. Now let's open up a test map that comes with the downloader DVD here. It's E3D _ environment base UT3. Go ahead and let's open that up. Go ahead and expand this viewport a little bit and see it a little bit better with our generic browser and screen. You can see this is all, it's just a pretty basic environment. All of these are assets that were created on the materials DVD that was done earlier, and we just kind of recycled some assets. So it's a very small, very basic environment, some lighting, and a player start and some height fog. So with that, let's go ahead and place one of these particle systems now. So go ahead and select it in the generic browser, and let's place this in the top view. Actually, it's just going to be easier to place, easier to see in the capture. So let's right click right about here and do add actor, add emitter P skullface 1. You can see it's beneath the ground, so we're going to want to raise it up a little bit. So there you have it. The emitter is placed in the world. And let's select our top viewport again. And this time let's select P skullface 2. Let's get right click, do add actor, skullface 2 emitter, and let's raise this one above the ground as well. If you want to get an idea for what they look like, you can hit the real-time button. You'll see them in the world here, and they are set up to dissolve as they're in transition as they did in Cascade. So let's turn real-time off. Let's close our generic browser, and to be safe, let's build lighting and geometry. Let's go ahead and save this level, and let's click Pi. Now this is the plane editor button, so we can see this in the actual game. You can see they're pretty giant, but you can see the one on the left dissolve, and the one on the right transitions to his kind of X-ray Fresnel shader there. And notice, of course, the first one here has the normal maps and the lighting applied. And the second one doesn't have that available to it because it's translucent. So you can get a good example of the pluses and minuses of going with either one of these systems here. If you want transparency, you're going to give up lighting. If you don't want transparency, you can have lighting. Okay, next we're going to import a skeletal mesh for to animate that you saw in the intro. This is that character that that kind of starts out in stone and as a statue and kind of becomes to real life, swinging his weapon around. To do that, first we're going to need to import him into our package here. So go ahead and right click and click import. And you're going to want to find monster.psk, and this is on the DVD and download. You can, of course, use anything you have exported from Max, but this is a skeletal mesh on the DVD that you can follow along with. Put this in the group called character, and let's name him monster_sk mesh. And you can see we've named the group wrong, so to rename him, let's click on our skeletal mesh and right click and do rename. Let's just change our group name to character. Go ahead and click OK. Okay, and open up the character group just by clicking on it. And let's right click in the generic browser here and do new anim set. And this is the anim set that was also exported from 3D Max. Let's go ahead and name this monster underscore anim and leave the factory at anim set. Click OK. Now when we open up the anim set, you can see that we already have a character in here, fully textured with a proper material on him. This is because we have a prototype set up here during the capture. This won't show up for you. You'll probably see an Unreal Tournament 3 character by default in here. So you want to make sure you find monster underscore SK mesh under the skeletal mesh tab. So go ahead and click on him, and notice he has default textures. This is actually the correct one we're looking for. We'll apply the materials and textures later when we create them. Now we need to import the animation. So do File, Import PSA, and this also is exported from Max. And we're looking for monster underscore animations. Go ahead and click Open, and you can see his animation has been imported. You can see it has an animation sequence there of 301 frames called come underscore alive. You click play down here at the bottom, it'll play his animation. You can see he kind of starts out as a statue, comes to life and swings around, swings his weapon around. And you can kind of see him there in a little idle pose. Now eventually we're going to be placing a material on him once we have it created, and that's going to go here in the skeletal mesh tab, and we're just going to apply it here with the green arrow like we have done on the other meshes already. Now for this next step, we're going to create the material for the stone material which is transitioning into the real-life colored material or texture on that character that I showed in the intro video. So first let's import the textures. And we're going to do all the non-normal textures for the character and for the stone. So let's go ahead and import these. Let's make sure that we have compression no alpha checked and click OK. And now let's import the ones with normal. And make sure the compression settings is set to normal map. Compression no alpha is set. And click OK. And I've already imported the static mesh for here. But to do that, just click on Meshes, right click and go Import. And you want to select Care Dissolve ASE. And click OK. And when it comes up with an error saying that no material has been applied, click OK, because that's the material we're working on and we're going to apply it, but it will still import. And now to create the actual material, we're going to start with the transition skull layer for Nell shader that we created a little while ago. This has a lot of the elements that we're going to use. We're going to duplicate this and we're going to modify it and clean it up a little bit so we can get nice transition material going on. So let's go ahead and duplicate this. And we're going to call this stone to real. M underscore stone to real. And let's go ahead and open this up. And first thing is let's import our static mesh. So we don't have the skull here anymore, but we have the actual character. So select meshes, select the static mesh, and click this little green arrow. And you can see there's our static mesh with the skull material applied to him right now. So let's select the main material node here, and let's set the blend mode to masked. This is going to be another masked material. And before we go on, let's go ahead and delete these three. This isn't going to have anything going into the opacity, so we don't even need these three nodes down here. Let's do a little bit of cleanup and organization first so I can make more sense of this, as it's going to get pretty messy. It already kind of is a little bit. The first thing, let's just kind of move these nodes to the back here. And I'm going to call these here. I'm going to Control Alt left drag, select all of them, press C for comment, And I'm going to call these bloom color. These control the bloom when it transitions. And of course it's color. And we're going to start with, let's start with some of the diffuse stuff going on. This is all the Fresnel information from the last shader, the last material, and we can just delete these. This is going to give us an error, but we'll get rid of that once we plug something in. Okay, and for the textures, we need to re-import one of the stone texture, the stone diffuse, and the character diffuse. That's what we're going to transition from and to first. So let's bring in the character diffuse. That's what we're going to transition to. And let's bring in the stone diffuse. This is what we're going to transition from. This is what we're going to start with. And put this here. Okay, the skull texture, we can go ahead and delete that. Let's take the stone texture, plug it into B here. And let's plug this value into A. This will be the actual colored texture that we import. It's kind of tough to tell. They're very similar, but this one has some color to it, and this one does not. This one's the stone. So let's go ahead and bring these up away from everything else. Bring this up a little bit. Keep things a little bit better organized. We can make sense of this material a little bit better. So let's put a comment box around these. Let's see, and we're going to call this diffuse. All right, so that's our diffuse, and of course, starting out as stone. Let's see if we can start seeing some of the transition work. Let's go back to our mesh emit vertex color, which we had. This was to call it from Cascade. We won't be calling it from Cascade anymore. We'll be calling it from Kismet Matinee. So we're going to delete this mesh emit vertex color. And we are instead going to bring down our scalar parameter node. If you've deleted it, it's right over here. You just want to drag in a scalar parameter node. Go ahead and delete the old one, create a new one. And the important thing about this one here is that you have to give it a parameter name. That's the most important thing. The name is what Kismet and Matinee are going to talk to. And also the material instance, which we need to create, which we'll get into later. So call that stone to real. And also for its description, we can call it stone to real, which just makes the bluish purple text appear above it for strictly a kind of visual reference. And we're going to plug this into, let's move between these two layers, because this is going to drive our two ifs. Again, plug it into the A of that if and the A of this if. Let's kind of separate these out a little bit so we can see them a little bit better. So yeah, here's what's driving the ifs. And remember, we have our sine curve for preview if we want to do that. So for the stone right now, let's give it a default value of 0.5. 0.5 is, halfway transitioned. So you can kind of see it's halfway stone and halfway colored. Now let me press L and kind of move the mouse around so we can get a little bit different lighting on here. Maybe we can see our character a little bit better. That's a little bit better. One thing I want to talk about is the bloom, is how it's very thick and very bright, a little too thick. There's two values we want to change for that. One is up here that is the edge width, and the other is going to be this constant 3 vector down here, which is controlling the bloom. Now, first, to make it easy, I'm going to set all these values to 1. So it glows a little bit, but that's not blooming too much yet. So setting these values all to 1, it's going to remove the bloom almost entirely, and the edge width is determined by this value here. So if we want the edge width to be greater, we're going to lower this value, because remember again, this value is multiplying the texture. So the darker it is, the longer it's going to take to dissolve, to transition. So, and the higher the value is, the closer it is to this value here. And of course, it's going to be much closer in value, giving a tighter edge. So if we give it, say, value of 0.99, you can see that the edge gets smaller. And then if we change our bloom value, let's give it values of 8, 4, and 1. You can see that kind of gives us a nice nice edge and a nice bloom. You can play with these values as well. If you want this to be 8, this to be 1, you can have a nice hot blue going on. And to preview it, let's plug in our sine curve, just so we can preview all of this as it's going along. There you go. You can see a little bit more of the edge there. A little bit more of the bloom is it's a little bit tighter. So let's go ahead and change these values back to 8, 4, and 1, so we get the kind of the orangish red going on. That looks pretty interesting. And let's click the green checkbox, apply our changes. Let's save our package. Now we're successfully transitioning the diffuse, but we need to apply the normals and the spec. And we also need to apply the emissive, because if you remember, this character has some emissive values on his hands and his legs that kind of glow blue. So let's import the spec and glow texture so we can get that taken care of. Let's see here. So it's character 1 spec glow mask. Let's go ahead and bring this over here. And we also want to bring in the spec of the stone, as we'll be transitioning both of them. So character stone specular. Let's bring that over. Again, this is the stone, and this is the character. We're going to transition from one to the other, just like the diffuse is doing. So to do that, we bring in another linear interpolate. And remember, the naming convention for the spec glow mask is RGB spec glow mask. So we want to plug in the spec to A, and this one, the entire specular values, into B. Remember, it's going to go from B to A based off of the alpha values, or the values plugged into the alpha. Okay, now we're going to plug in to the alpha transition the same way as the diffuse is transitioning. So we want to take this if that's transitioning the diffuse, and we want to transition the spec. So now the specular is transitioning just as the diffuse is. And we are going to plug this directly into specular. I've got the specular for the stone and the specular for the character all properly set up. So let's go ahead and select all of these and give them a comment box. We'll call it spec, and just to keep things a little bit neater. And next thing we're going to do is create the emissive. We already have the emissive for the edge, for the hot edge here, but we need to bring in the emissive for the character himself, the glows on his hands and his legs. So to do that, what we need to do, of course, is another linear interpolate. And we want to take this linear interpolate and blend it between either itself or a value of 0. I'll show you why in a moment here. Now it starts at 0 and it transitions to A, which is 0 when it's stone, and it's going to transition to these values here when it comes to life. And that again is going to be driven by the same if that's driving the diffuse and the spec. Now let's plug this into emissive. You can see that it made the little bit of emissive values around kind of his hands. You can see the white glowing there, and on his legs, and on his axe, and at the end of his guns here. But of course, you can see it took away from the hot edge, and they're also not very bright. They're not very colorful. So we need to add the two together and make these a little more colorful and a little brighter. So to do that, first we want to add it to the edge. This is the edge, and we want to add the two together. So we just simply create an add. So let's add this one, linear interpolate, into the edge. Let's plug this into the emissive. And you can see you have the hot edge plus the glows on the hands, and they don't transition on until the transition actually happens. But we still need to add some color and some brightness to those, to the emissive on his body there. To do that, we are going to create a multiply, or add in a multiply, and a constant 3 vector. And we are going to simply multiply this linear interpolate by this constant 3 vector. And let's give this some values first. Let's say 0, 3, and 9. A nice sky blue with values brighter than 1, so it will bloom a little bit. We're going to multiply that into A up here, not B, into A, because remember B is coming from the edge. Now you can see when it transitions, it's got the nice blue glow. So let me move these around so you can kind of see what's going on here. Yeah, this would be your emissive. Let's scoot everything back so we make a little bit of room. Make things a little bit easier to see. Let's move these back here. And these all have to do with emissive, so I'm going to create a comment box around them. Actually, that's 1M. Yes. Let's call this emissive. And last but not least is we're going to add and transition the normal. So let's apply our changes and save our package. Okay, to transition our normals, we do the same thing that we've been doing for the diffuse spec and emissive. And we're just going to transition them with linear interpolate. First, let's import our normals. First, we have our stone. I'm going to drag over a texture sample. This is going to be our stone normal. And we want to bring over our character normal. I'm just going to call this one stone and the other one character, just so they look very similar in the viewport. It can be easy to get them confused. And we want to create another linear interpolate. And we simply want to blend the character into A and the stone into B, because remember, we're going from B to A. And this is going to blend based on the values from this if, once again, the same if that's driving all the other transitions. And we plug this into the normal value. Move these up so you guys can see better. Let's put a comment box around these. Okay, let's go ahead and apply these changes and save the package. Before we move on, we need to make sure to hook up the scalar parameter, and then we're going to get ready to hook this up into Kismet and Matinee. So yeah, set the scalar parameter to 1, and we're going to plug this value into the ifs that are driving everything. Go ahead and apply and save the package. Okay, before we move on, I'm going to create a little bit less expensive version of the stone to reel material. We'll be using the one we just made for the rest of DVD, but in case you're in game development and you need a similar effect, but it needs to be a little less expensive, I'll show you how to make a little bit optimized version of this one, as it is 74 instructions and 7 texture lookups. So let's go ahead and duplicate this. And let's just call it stone to reel underscore LOD underscore level of detail. We're not going to be hooking this one up to anything, but I do want to show you some tricks to help optimize it. For starters, we can use just one normal map. I'd say just use the end result normal map. The character and the stone are similar, and since you're going to end up being the character, you should just use the character's normal map. And that, as you can see, it got rid of 3 instructions and a texture lookup. So that's one quick optimization. Another thing we can do is plug the spec from the character straight in to the specular. We don't have to blend it with anything. So take the spec from the character texture here, spec being the red channel, and plugging it in the specular of the material. Now we can get rid of these nodes and these texture lookups. And now for the transition, when we start with stone, instead of having a stone texture altogether, what we can do is take our final texture and desaturate it, and kind of plug in a desaturated version of it to kind of simulate stone, which might not look ideal up close, but it'll be pretty effective. So let's go ahead and delete the stone texture. Let's take our diffuse texture here. We're going to plug it into a desaturation node. And you just plug that straight into the desaturation node. And its value you want to give it, you're going to have to plug in a constant for how much you want it to be desaturated. So let's go ahead and create a constant. And move these up so we can see them better. Plug in the constant into here. That's going to desaturate at 0, so you can see it's the same exact value. Let's desaturate it. Value of 1. It's going to remove all the color information. Let's move these back down into place. And see what's going on here. So you have the texture being desaturated, kind of transitioning to itself, to its non-desaturated version. So here's the texture blending into A, and then being desaturated, blending into B. And now to preview this, let's just plug in the sine curve so we can see how it looks. Tough to see with the notes up there at the top. Here's how it looks. And so we optimized kind of the normals, the spec, and the diffuse. We didn't do anything to the emissive because there are no texture lookups in the emissive. So one of the most expensive things a material can do is how many textures it's looking up. And the emissive isn't looking up any textures because it's subtracting just these 2 ifs, and then it's using multiplies, and it only has the one texture lookup anyways. It doesn't have any more than that. So let's hook up the scalar parameter, and this one we can call done. Let's go ahead and apply those changes, and let's see how much that helps. So it was 74 instructions and 7 textures. Now it's 69 instructions and 4 textures. And you do get a similar result. So you might want to, depending on your situation in the game, how many things are on screen, what's being rendered, you might have to use a little bit more of an optimized version. So let's save this and let's get ready to go into Kismet and Matinee, and we can trigger this in game. Okay, now we're going to create, we're going to add this all into Kismet. First we need to apply our material to the skeletal mesh that we're going to be using. The skeletal mesh will be this one here, and we're actually going to apply a material instance to it, because through Kismet Matinee, we're going to want to talk to that scalar value we gave it, and so that's what we need to apply. Scalar value you can only talk to the scalar value through a material instance actor in Unreal, so that we need to create a material instance. Let's go to M Stone to Real, right click, do create material instance constant, and we can just leave that naming convention the same and click OK. And here's our material instance window here. Notice that the scalar parameter values, it lists the one we gave it, and check that box. To test it out in here, you can give it values anything between 0 and 1, kind of see how it looks. Value 0.5, 0.1, and kind of get the idea of make sure it's working correctly. And ours is working. Let's go ahead and close this. Let's open the character, monster SK mesh. Bring this into the capture window for you guys. And under mesh here, you want to expand the materials tab. Back in our generic browser, you want to select the material instance we just made. We'll plug this into here. You can see it. You can see how it looks here, and it looks like his teeth are not masked out. So we need to fix that there. And to do that, go ahead and close this and open up our parent material. And there's one quick thing we forgot to do with this, and that is plug in the mask. We have spec glow and mask for our texture here, so we just need to take the mask and plug it into opacity mask. Go ahead and close this. Yes, we want to apply changes. That's similar to clicking the green checkbox, which I just forgot to do. Let's save the package. And let's double check our character. Let's see how his teeth look. Yeah, you can see his teeth there. See how they're masked out. It's also a spot on his skirt. Let's see here. Yeah, see right there. His skirt now has the proper mask. Okay, now that we have the material created and the material applied to the skeletal mesh, let's open up a level and get going with Kismet and Matinee. Okay, now we're going to take our character and hook him up into Kismet Matinee in a level, and we can show up in the level, and he'll dissolve, and we'll set it to loop so he can dissolve over and over. I have the environment base level open, so if you don't have it open, let's go ahead and open that. It's E3D environment base. It was shown earlier. So first thing we want to do is let's place down our skeletal mesh character. So go to the character group, select skeletal mesh, right click in the viewport. You can do add actor, add skeletal mesh. And looks like he's below the geometry. So let's move him into view. Okay, so now we have our character in place in the world here. And next thing we need to add is a material instance actor. And that is in the actor classes tab in our generic browser. And you want to select material instance actor. And then right click over here. Let's right click on the character so it will kind of appear here. You select the character, right click, and do add material instance actor here. And you can see it's just in front of him there. And this material instance actor, we want to select it and press F4 to bring up its properties. And for the you want to expand the material instance actor tab. And in the generic browser, materials group, let's find our material instance that we created. And stone drill inst, and just plug it in here. Go ahead and close this. This is going to talk to the material instance. And if you remember, that material instance is applied to the character. Okay, and to get the material instance to talk to the character, we need to use Kismet. So let's Kismet and Matinee. So let's close the generic browser for now, and open up Kismet. And the first thing we're going to do is create a new event, and it's called level loader invisible. And we're going to run this into a new Matinee sequence. So create new Matinee. And one thing we want to do on our skeletal mesh, actually, let's select our skeletal mesh. Press F4 for properties, and you want to select the movement tab. And you want to set the physics section to phys interpolating. That will allow it to move or animate through Matinee. If you don't do that, you'll get an error and it won't work. It won't animate. You won't be able to add an animation track to Matinee. So let's, with the material instance selected, let's double click Matinee. And over here in this area, let's right click and do add an empty group. And we're going to call this group Stone to Real. And we're going to select this group, and we want to right click and add a float material param track. Okay, so we created a new group and we added a float material param track. Now if you look back in Kismet here, you'll see when we created the new group Stone to Real, it added a new kind of named nub here. And because we had the material instance already selected in the level, it already attached the material instance to this little nub. Now back in Matinee, you want to select the float material parameter track. Give the parameter name. We want to name this what we named it in the material, which again is Stone to Real. And we are going to add a keyframe, some keyframes to animate that value from 1 to 0 over time. So let's turn on the curve editor, which is just this little box here. And you can kind of navigate back and forth with holding down the left mouse button. And you can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. So let's zoom out quite a bit. We want to, the animation lasts about 9 or 10 seconds. And the dissolve is however long, or the transition is however long we want it to be. So let's, we want to extend this. It's going to be longer than 5 seconds. So zoom out, so you can see about, I don't know, 10 or 12 seconds, maybe 15 seconds on the screen. And we're just going to drag these. This is kind of the working area, the area of the entire thing. We're going to drag this to 15 seconds. Now, if yours isn't snapping, see how mine is snapping every 0.5 seconds? That just means you want to check this, you want to toggle this little toggle snap button. Make sure it's down. And this here is what you want it to snap to. I have it set to snap to every 0.5 seconds. So let's go ahead and expand these green arrows as well. And the first keyframe we want to set is, we'll set it in, let's say 3 seconds. So move the little black bar to 3 seconds. Sometimes it's all the way to the left over here, and it's tough to see. So you'll just have to drag it out so you can see it. But so yeah, in about 3 seconds, let's go ahead and add a key. And you can select the keyframe here and right click. And in terp mode, let's go to curve. Sometimes it comes in as stepped by default, or constant or linear. We want to set it to curved. So you want to select that, right click, do set time, which is 3 seconds, which is fine. We're going to right click and do set value. I'm going to give that a value of 1. And that's our material, our scalar parameter in our material. So now we want to move down to, let's say about 3.5 seconds. Let's add another key. And here we can select it and do set value. Put a value of 0 as it is. And let's set its time. Make sure that's at 6.5, which it is. And this is going to talk to that material. This is talking to the material instance actor, which is talking to the material instance, which is on the character. And it's going to get it to transition from a value of 1 to 0. So next thing we need to do is animate the character. Now we already imported those animations earlier. And let's open up the generic browser so I can show you what they look like. I don't think we ever played them before. But if you open up the monster anims here, double click on it, you can see that here's our character, our monster. And if you just click play, you'll see that's how he animates. So let's go back into Matinee. And with the character selected, we want to add a new group. So right click and do add new empty group. Well, let's call this character. We'll select the character group and right click, do add anim control track. Now also on the character here, you want to select the character again, and we need to add in that animation set that we imported earlier. So right click to add new item. And back in our generic browser, we have our animation sequence here, our animation set. And you just want to plug that in here. So if we select the animation track and click a keyframe, it's going to ask us which animation sequence we want to use. And this is the only one that's in that animation sequence, so just go ahead and click OK. It's called Come Alive. And you can see that Come Alive starts right there. And it shows, if you zoom out, you can see that it extends this is the length of the entire animation, so it extends further than what we have. So let's go ahead and drag these arrows out a little bit further. And now it's going to have, let's see, the dissolve is going to happen from a value of 1 to 0. So it's going to transition, or dissolve. It's all kind of the same. It's going to do the same value. And then it's going to play the animation. So let's go ahead and close Matinee. And in Kismet, you can see how it automatically plugged the skeletal mesh into the character group. And if it didn't do that, you can just select the skeletal mesh and right click in here and just do new object variable using skeletal mesh actor 1, and then you just hook that up. But we don't need to do that because ours is already attached. And for level loaded and visible, run that into play. So this is going to say once the level is loaded and visible, do all the stuff in Matinee that we told it to do. Animate the value from 1 to 0 and play the animation. And we want to see it over and over again, so we're going to check B looping. And that's you just select Matinee, just one click, and check B looping. Let's go ahead and close this. Close our generic browser. Let's build lights and geometry. Let's play in Pi. You can see our character transitions and animates. One thing, if you notice, we'll see over here, there's a bright value that sticks around longer than it should. Right there, the base of his, below his hand. And that's because when we made our material, back in our material, our stone to real material, goes back to that gradient texture I was talking about. When we made this material and added a value of 0.125 to it, it made it some pixels of it bright enough to where they're not going down to 0 completely. So an easy way to fix that. Now you can either mess with your material or the texture itself by making the values darker, or you can and then not have to add it to a constant here. But one quick fix we can do in Kismet or Matinee is opening up Matinee here, and instead of just going to 0, you can right click and do set value and go minus 0.1. And that'll just make sure that it goes completely transitioned. And one thing if you want it to animate a little bit sooner, you just select the keyframe here on the animation track, hold down Control, and just move it to the left. And so let's see how this looks. You can see him kind of transition into the real deal, and there's nothing glowing beneath his hand this time. So it's completely transitioned, and it's going to loop. So he's going to pop back into place, start out as stone, and then transition into his real textures. And that's all there is to this. Our next step is going to build on this material a little bit to make it dissolve entirely. Let's go ahead and save this map. You can go ahead and save it as whatever you want, wherever you want. Go ahead and save that, and let's move on to the next step. Okay, this next material we're going to build off of that stone to real transition material we just made, and we're going to make it dissolve material. Like I said, building off of this one, so let's go ahead and duplicate this guy, and we're going to call it M dissolve. Go ahead and save the package, and let's open up M dissolve. Bring this into the capture window, and this we're not going to add too much to it. We just need to add a third layer, this being the first layer, this being the second, and a third layer being the mask layer. And then we'll need to add that mask layer to our current mask, which is the teeth in the skirt. So to get started, let's select all of these nodes. Just control click all of them, and press Control C, then Control V. And hold down Control to move them up kind of out of the way. Let's move these down a little closer so we can see them a little bit better. Now you'll notice that the multiply was disconnected because it just duplicated these nodes. It doesn't take on their connections. So we need to connect this one up here as well. I'm just moving it up so we can see it easier. And that's our texture. And let's move this back. And our edge width, let's give this a value of 0.7 for now. I'll be able to show you what that does in a second. On our if node, this needs to be controlled by the same thing that's controlling the other ifs, and that's the scalar parameter. So let's take that scalar param and let's plug this into A of the ifs. Drag the scalar parameter back down. And one thing that we need to do with the scalar parameter that's very important is we need to change its parameter name to dissolve. And let's also change its description to dissolve. So we're going to create a similar setup to how we did for the stone to real, what we're going to call dissolve this time. And now we're using this layer. This layer is just going to be for a mask. It's not going to be transitioning to a layer that you'll see. It's going to make the mask out the rest of the characters. So let's select all of these. Give it a comment box. We'll call it, let's see, layer mask layer. We'll call it mask layer. Now this mask, we could plug it directly into the mask, but we need to add it to or multiply it with the values from the mask texture that is used for the teeth and the skirt. To do that, we just need to bring in a multiply. Let's put a multiply right there between them. We'll plug this if into the multiply here, and we'll take the mask over here. Remember, spec glow mask RGB into the B value. And you can kind of see that it's already multiplying a value of 1 with these values here, which are 0 for the teeth and the skirt. And so let's drag this over so it's easier to see where we're hooking it into, and it's going straight into the opacity mask. And now if we want a little preview of what this is doing, let's give this its own comment box. We'll call this mask. And if we want a little preview of what it's doing, remember we can just change the dissolve values here, the dissolve scalar parameter values. So a value of 0.5 is going to look something like this. You can see the stone, then the dissolve, the layer, the hot layer, followed by the real textures behind it. Let's see here, to make the mask layer a little wider, you would lower this value. So see if you give it a value of 0.1, you can see a lot of it is still left behind. Value of 0.2, 0.3, you get the idea here. And if you want to preview it before we hook it up in game, like before, we can just plug in this sine curve. So let's take the sine curve, plug it into A of all the ifs. And you can see it kind of transitioning and dissolving there. Now, if you want the edge to be a little bit tighter, increase that. For the mask to be a little bit tighter, go ahead and increase that value. That looks pretty good. And the only thing we need to do now is plug the scalar parameter back in and give it a default value of 1. Give it a value of 1. Plug it into A and all the ifs that we are using. And move it up so it's easier to connect. And then I'll move it right back. Here we go. Here's our material. It's not too bad. This is the top layer, the middle layer edge, and the mask layer. And let's go ahead and apply these changes. And we'll save the package. And just like we did for the last material, we're going to create a material instance for this one. So go ahead and select mDissolve, right click, create new material instance constant. The name is correct, click OK. Now let's open up its scalar parameter values. You can see it has a scalar parameter named dissolve. Activate that. Now you can give it a value of 0.5 to kind of see it working here in the viewport. Set it back to 1. Go ahead and close this. Now what we're going to do is take our skeletal mesh, which we had imported this earlier, and so this one will work. We can apply the material to this one, as it is doesn't have a material on it yet. We just used it for the viewport preview, if you remember. For this, this is again a static mesh, not the skeletal mesh. The static mesh is in meshes, the skeletal mesh is under character. But we want to apply this to the static mesh. And if you open it up, expand its LOD, its elements, and its material, you want to find the material instance, not the materials, mDissolve inst, and just plug that in here. And you can see that is that's ready to be hooked up in a level, much like the last one. And we're going to hook that up here in Kismet and Matinee in a second. All right, now we're going to take that static mesh we made, and we're going to place it on a level and make it dissolve away, similar to how we did with the stone to real life, but this one's not going to animate. So go ahead and open up that base level again if you don't have it open already. That is the 3D environment base. Go ahead and open that. And what we're going to do here is you can select the ground, and then for under meshes, make sure the character dissolve S mesh static mesh is, and let's place it in the level. Let's go ahead and right click and do add actor, character dissolve S mesh. Place it in the world here. It's not bad. You can just feed her in the ground a little bit, so we'll move them up a tad. Let's see, that looks good. And we need to add another material instance actor. So go to actor classes, highlight material instance actor, right click in the viewport here. Let's see, select material instance actor, right click in the viewport, and let's just add material instance actor here. Let's move him kind of into view in front of our character a little bit. Pan back, he's under the ground, and we'll hook him up. And remember, for material instance actors, go to its properties by pressing F4, and for the material instance tab, we want to plug in the material instance that we just made, which is mdissolve inst. Go ahead and plug that in there. Close generic browser, and we are again going to open up Kismet. Right click and create a new event. We want to do level loaded invisible again. Create new matinee. And with material instance, the material instance actor selected, open up matinee. Right click over here and do add empty group. And we'll call this dissolve. Okay, and that's going to create, that's going to attach the material instance actor to the dissolve category automatically. So back in matinee, select the dissolve track, right click, and do add new float material param track. If you want, you can click on the little box there to bring the curve editor in. For parameter name, calling it dissolve. And let's go ahead and zoom out so you can see how much time we have here, or set the time we would like. And since this character isn't animating, I'm just going to say over 10 seconds. Actually, let's say over like 7 or 8 seconds. And let's drag the green arrows out as well. And let's say around 2 seconds, we'll add a keyframe. And right click on this, and you can do set value, give it a value of 1. And move the slider down, say 5.5 seconds. Add another key, and it defaults it to 0. But remember, that kind of caused a little glow to appear, but not below his hand when we didn't want it to. So let's give it a value a little bit less than 1. So right click and go minus 0.1 to set its new value. This looks good. So now back to Kismet. You'll notice we don't have anything attached for the static mesh. That's because we're strictly talking to the material instance here, or the material instance actor rather. Let's go ahead and plug the level load invisible into out into the play. Matinee will set this to looping, and this should play with any luck. You can see our character there, and he dissolves with a little bit of a trail of the transition material. There you have it. Next, we're going to string this one into the transition, add it all together so he goes from stone to real life, he animates, and then he dissolves. Okay, for the last and final step, we're going to string the stone to reel together with the dissolve. So it's going to look just like in the intro video when we had it all together. So let's open the map with the stone to reel transition. And now this is already set up. If you remember in Kismet, this is already set up to loop, and it goes from stone to reel. It transitions. One thing we want to do is uncheck looping. I'll explain that to you. We don't want, for this setup, we're going to be swapping material instances, and we don't want it to loop, because to loop we'd have to reset those material instances, and it just add extra nodes that we don't need for this. So let's go ahead and close Kismet for now. Let's open up the generic browser. Now let's go to Actor Classes, Material Instance Actor, and we want to add the Material Instance Actor. Bring it up so we can see it. And this Material Instance Actor is going to have the Dissolve Material Instance on it. Remember, this one has the Stone to Reel. This one's going to have the Dissolve, so select it and press F4. And under Materials, mDissolve Inst. Look that up in the mat inst area. Let's go ahead and close this. And we are going to open Kismet again. Now, one thing we need to do with this being selected, we want to open up Matinee, select Stone to Reel, right click on it, do Add New Event Track. Now let's zoom out, see how much time we have here. Let's see, we have it happening over a course of 19 seconds. That's probably plenty. Let's move the time slider to about, let's say 11 seconds, 10.5, 11 seconds. And we are going to, with this selected, the event track selected, add a key. And we're going to call this Change Material. And what that did there, what that key does is it creates a little nub here on the Matinee. You can see Change Material. And the reason for that is we are going to take this second material instance here, tough to see, and add new variable using material instance actor 3. We need this to talk to Matinee. And before we can do that, we need to create a nub for it to talk to. So in the dark gray area, right click and do Add New Empty Group. Let's call this Dissolve. And you can see it created a little nub. And we just want to add that to this material instance actor. All right, and this Dissolve, let's move. We're going to do the same thing here. Let's fast forward to say about, actually we need to right click and add a new float material param track. Give its param name Dissolve. Add a key. And right click and let's give it a value of, say, 1. Let's go ahead and move down to 15.5 seconds and add another key. Right click and set value, and let's do minus 0.1 again. Alright, now what's going to happen is it's going to go from stone to reel, and it's playing its animation, and it's going to change material, which we haven't done anything to yet, and then it's going to dissolve. Now we're not seeing that yet because we haven't done anything with the change material. So let's hook that up in Kismet. So we have the change material nub here. So what we need to do here is add a set material node, and that's under new action. Let me right click over here so I can see it in the capture. New action, actor, set material. Now one thing to remember is this only works on skeletal meshes. This does not work on static meshes. We already have a skeletal mesh in the level, and that's represented by this node here. So go ahead and drag this down linking it to the skeletal mesh. And in this set material parameters over here, for new material, we need to plug in the material instance, the dissolve material instance. So let's open up generic browser again. And dissolve instance is already selected. Now let's go ahead and plug it in there. So we want to, and also connect it from the change material into the set material node. And then one thing we want to do is right click and do add new action. Material instance set scalar parameter. Let me right click over here so you can see that better in the capture. So I want to set scalar parameter. And you want to set this value to 1. And we also want to plug in the material instance here as well. That's already selected. Plug it in there. Give it a value of 1. So what's happening is, with Matinee open, what's happening in Matinee as it's playing, it's, let's see, this stone to real is dissolving here, or transitioning here from 1 to 0. It's starting the animation to play. And then at this point here is when it does the change material nub at that frame. So what is that? That's about 10.5 seconds in. So at 10.5 seconds in, it's going to do anything that's plugged into here, which is set material, and set its value to 1. And then it's going to dissolve from a value of 1 to 0. So it's going to set the material to the dissolve, and then it's going to animate that value on that scalar parameter that we gave it named also dissolve. So let's go ahead and play this and see how it looks. Actually, real quick, a lot of the stuff you can preview in Matinee in real time by scrubbing through, and you'll see that it transitions, but it doesn't dissolve. In Matinee, it's not going to show you the material swapping in real time, unfortunately. We have to do that in Pi. And remember, we don't have the setup to loop, so it's only going to play the one time after we load the level. So let's build lighting and geometry, and then we'll load the level and play it. Go ahead and click Play in Editor. And you can see it transitions. He animates, and then he's going to dissolve. Okay, so he didn't dissolve completely, so let's open up Matinee again. And let's right click on the value here. And it's, I gave it a value of 0.1. We want it minus 0.1. Type in the 0, just to be safe, minus 0.1. And now let's play this. And when we say Pi, that's short for Play in Editor. That's what this button here is. Okay, so let's see how it looks. Starts out to stone, then it transitions to his real material. You'll see it pops to stone. That's a mistake we made in the dissolve material. So let's go back and fix that. In the generic browser, in our material, or mdissolve. This is a real quick fix, by the way. Okay, so to fix it from popping into stone, we need to make some adjustments to the material. Things are just reversed out of order. So this one, for example, it starts at stone. We want it to start with the real one. We want to take this one here and plug it into where this guy is right now. So let's Control C, Control V, real material. And let's plug this in to B here. Let's move the stone up. Plug that into A here. This we can delete this. Go ahead and delete this. So now it's going to transition from real. When it dissolves, it's going to start out with the real materials, and it's going to trail a little bit with the stone. You're not going to notice it too much, but it is there. And now we need to do the same for the spec and the normals. So the normals, let's go here first. It's going to be easy. We want to take the character normal and go into B, and the stone normal go into A. Remember, it's going to go from B to A. B is going to be the character, and A is going to be the stone. So it goes from character to stone. And we just need to do the same thing for the spec, which is pretty much the same thing. We want to take this specularity here and go into B. It's going to take the specularity of the character and then go into the specularity of the stone. And last but not least, we will need to change the emissive as well. So it's going to start out with the value of, with the glow value, with the proper glow values. And then it's going to transition to nothing. So it's going to go from B to A. So I'll go ahead and apply these changes. And let's save our package. Let's close these windows and see how it works in the level. Let's go ahead and play an editor. And now it should pop, but it should pop to the real material, so you shouldn't notice it when it does the change material. Yeah, see, you don't notice anything, and now it dissolves away properly. And I'll show that to you one more time. You can see the end result. Your transitions, plays the animation, and a few seconds later it dissolves away. Well, that wraps up this effects material DVD. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us on the boards at e3d.com. We'll do our best to answer them. I have my contact information on there, as do the other instructors. Yeah, feel free to post comments and questions, and we also would like to see some other examples. If you guys come up with some examples on your own using these similar methods of what you might be able to come up with. Quick example I've wanted to do for a while but haven't yet is to have a level kind of all flat shaded and not much to it, and then you kind of apply the transition material and it transitions into a nice normal mapped level. Just some various ideas, and kind of have fun with it and see what you come up with, and let us know.